Okay, so today I'm going to pick up where I left off on my last lecture. We started part two of Siddhartha following this copy of the text, and we did the first three chapters of part two, Kamala, Among the Child People, and Samsara. And today I'm going to cover the next three chapters of part two, which is By the River, the Ferryman, and the Sun. So when we last left Siddhartha, he had just decided that he had his fill. He was kind of indulging himself in all these vices, what some might call a sinful life, right? He was overindulging in wine, in food, in gambling, in women, even in Kamala herself. And then they kind of each share this moment where Siddhartha, the last time he lays with Kamala, he looks at her and realizes that she is just as tired as he is. And, by tired, I don't mean, fatigued. I mean, soul tired, like she's kind of had enough. And when she realizes that Siddhartha leaves, and she realizes that Siddhartha leaves before she even finds out she's pregnant, she closes her garden. She's no longer going to be a courtesan. She no longer has visitors to her home. And then she finds out that she's carrying Siddhartha's son. And then we find out in these next chapters that she decides to pursue Gautama Buddha herself. She intends on trying to find this thing which she saw in Siddhartha, which was this kind of higher realm in him, that he was not like everyone else that she had been with. And so let's begin on page 77 in this text. The chapter's called By the River. And so I want to also point out to you too, like as far as time reference in the book, and time is another theme as far as, especially as we're going to come into these chapters when they're going to talk about time. It takes very little to move a story forward. So Siddhartha wandered through the forest, and I'm going to point to that in a second. Siddhartha wandered through the forest far from town and knew only one thing, that he could not go back. Sometimes we don't know where we're going in life, but we do know where we don't want to go, and sometimes that's enough. And so this is how we open this next phase of Siddhartha's journey. Is he doesn't know where he's going. He's almost he's more aimless now than he's ever been, because when he was leaving his father's house, he knew he wanted to be a samana, so he knew he was going to the samanas in the forest. When he was leaving the samanas in the forest, he knew he was going to go see Buddha, so he had a goal there, a path. When he left Buddha, he knew that he was going to follow his senses. So whatever delighted him, he would pursue. And here he is, where he's literally, for the first time, completely depleted. He feels like he has kind of followed every path he can think of at this point. The path of virtue, the path of vice. And here he is with no aim for the first time. We see our protagonist as just as stubborn, as obstinate, as determined, and committed as he ever was. But we don't know where he's going. And he doesn't know where he's going. But that's okay. Because just like I said, sometimes you don't know where you're headed, but you do know what you're leaving behind. And if that's all you know, sometimes that's enough, right? To just keep walking one foot in front of the other until you get where you're going. So the paragraph continues, this feeling of emptiness and depletion that he has, that this life had led for many years was over and done with. He had drained it, had drunk it to the dregs, to the point of disgust. Dead was the songbird he had dreamed of. Dead was the bird in his heart. And birds are very symbolic. If you think of a bird, we think of, and we just talked about in the last lecture, right, how we closed out, how he had the dream of the dead bird in Kamala's cage. And then in real life, when she found Siddhartha had left, she ends up freeing this bird. And I mentioned to you in my last lecture, I closed off with the idea of him being the bird. Which is very fitting because birds have a ton of symbolism in them. We envy birds because the fact that they could just take flight and leave a situation. And I think we certainly envy that a lot of the times in life. We just could just pick up and go. One of the things we don't often see, though, is that, or we don't often realize what we should envy about birds is not just their flight, but their perspective on life. Right? The fact that a bird can be high in a tree. He may see the person coming down the road to your house, but it's not because he's a prophet. It's just because his perspective is a little bit different than yours. His perspective is a little wider, right? So he's kind of got that bird's eye view, or sometimes we call it like a God perspective, because he's high above us. And when you're high away from things, things seem peaceful and much more simple. In poetry, birds symbolize not only freedom, and certain different kinds of birds and colors of birds symbolize different things too, right? I mean, we have the legend of the crow, which is a dark bird, a black bird. It symbolizes danger or even death, right? That's coming. A white bird, like a dove, can symbolize peace, or in Christianity, it symbolizes the Holy Spirit. But birds generally symbolize freedom. And in poetry, poets often put themselves as birds in poetry. So if there's ever a poem you're hearing about a bird, it is usually kind of referencing the poet's self or soul. So here is this dead songbird he had dreamed of. Dead was the bird in his heart. And this imagery of the bird will come back in a page. But the first thing that I thought of was that poem Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar. It says, I know what the caged bird thinks. I know what the caged bird feels. I know why the caged bird sings. Right? Where this idea of why would we put something that is so beautiful and meant to be free in a cage. And here is Siddhartha saying he has a bird in his heart. He was deeply entangled in samsara, so this cycle of like endlessness, right? And he feels like he's stuck in a cycle, like any of us. If we were stuck in a cycle, we would feel depleted, exhausted, confused, giving up. And here we see something that we didn't think we were going to see in Siddhartha: suicidal thoughts. He yearned to know nothing more about himself. Now remember, the self, the ego, is kind of what he'd been searching to kill this whole time. To find peace, to be dead. If only lightning could come and kill him! Exclamation point. If only a tiger could come and devour him! Exclamation point. If only there were a wine, a poison that could bring him a stupor, bring him sleep and oblivion, and no more awaking! Exclamation point. So he feels utterly disgusted with himself. He feels utterly hopeless. Birds symbolize hope. So when he says dead was the bird in his heart, he is feeling hopeless. Was this cycle not exhausted and completed for him? Siddhartha reaches a large river in the forest, and you remember from my last lecture I told you about what water means, right? Change. And his crossing the river from the inner world to the outer world when he first was going and left the Buddha, and to go into the worldliness, and he really submerged himself in that over a period of years. And now he had come back to this same river. The same river across which the ferryman had once ferried him when Siddhartha had been a young man coming from Gautama's town. So now he's standing at this river, and this river really speaks to him. This river really, really becomes meaningful in the book. So now let's go on to page 78. It says in that first full paragraph, gazing down, he felt entirely filled with the wish to let go and go under in this water. In the water, a dreadful emptiness mirrored a fearful emptiness in his soul. Yes, he was at the end. Nothing was left for him but to snuff himself out, but to shatter the failed formation of his life, toss it at the feet of snickering gods. This was the great vomiting he had longed for, death, the shattering of the form he hated. Let the fish eat him, this dog Siddhartha, this madman, this foul and fetid body, this exhausted and misused soul. Let the fish and crocodiles eat him. Let the demons dismember him. So he's really self-deprecating himself right now. And it's because he has regret, because he has guilt, and these things lead to self-hate. At the bottom of 78, we get back to that idea of the voice that he's searching so hard for when he first left the Buddha and goes into the world. And he says, I'm just going to follow my voice. So if my voice says I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. If my voice says I'm lustful, then I'm going to do that, right? Now the voice comes back to him. And realize he's feeling very alone right now. So that voice is kind of like this undercurrent, if you will, of support in him. But now from remote regions of his soul, from past times of his worn-out life, a sound came flashing. I like the way that's written, because we don't think of sounds as flashing. We think of lights as flashing. But Hesse is really trying to say, like, it's a warning sound, right? Because if we see a light flashing, that's like a warning sound, right? So the sound is in him kind of like a siren. Imagine that. It was a word, a syllable, which he lulled unthinkingly to himself, the old initial word, the final word of all Brahmin prayers, the sacred Om, which virtually means the perfect, the completion. And the instant the Om touched Siddhartha's ears, his slumbering spirit suddenly awoke, and it recognized the folly of his action. And now Siddhartha was profoundly frightened. And this paragraph is really interesting too, because now we see two new things about our protagonist. Number one, he's thinking of killing himself, which is why would Siddhartha ever want to do that, right? Siddhartha is so strong and knows what he wants to do. I would never, and so wise, right? He's been taught the best things. So how could he, and experienced everything. So how could he want to just give up on life now? But the second thing is that he is surprised. We have not seen Siddhartha be surprised by anything. Even when he sees Kamala in the garden, the way that Hesse writes it, he's not surprised. He's enamored. He's falling deeply in physical affection for her, but he's not surprised. So he's here now profoundly frightened. Okay? This childish wish had grown in him to find peace by snuffing his body. He really surprised himself. He's like, wait a minute, am I really thinking this? And this sounds like surprise, and we never really see him surprised. And so when we get to the next paragraph, and he says Om, and he's screaming it now. It's kind of not the way that he'd been taught to say, because it's supposed to be this peaceful, full, rich Om, but now it's Om, Om. It's like it's like he wants it to own it again so bad, and knew about Brahma, knew about the indestructibility of life, knew again about all the godliness he had forgotten. So he has to remind himself what life is. And in the beginning of the book, he knows life never ends, right? And we know that even from science. All the matter that has ever been created for this earth, for the time of this earth, was created at the Big Bang. There's no matter that is destroyed or created. It just changes energy. And so that is what life is. We transform to one thing to another. Like water has 3 components, but right, it never disappears. It could be steam, it could be liquid, and it could be solid. And so now we're going back to the Hindu ways. Okay, so now he's reminding himself about this godliness, as he refers to it. And now is this anaphora of the deep sleep. And deep sleep is what in Hinduism is believed to happen after death. That it's just a very deep sleep. And so, so he has a spiritual death in this chapter, okay? Siddhartha sank down at the foot of the coconut tree, laid his head on the root of the tree, and sank into a deep sleep. Deep was his sleep. He felt as if 10 years has passed after he awoke. Now we're getting back to this idea of time. Is time real? Is time an illusion? Is time not completely all perception and referential, right? Or subjective? Like that time that we saw Siddhartha standing in his father's house when he was unmoved, and his father was like, won't you go do something? Like, I'm going to go do the rituals. I'm going to go this. I got to go eat food. Like, the day is going on. And Siddhartha's like, no, it's not for me. Right? So that in that moment, I spoke about in my first lecture how time was different for Siddhartha than for the father. And here we're seeing this theme come back again of time. But it took him a long while to remember. The past seemed veiled, endlessly far, endlessly remote, endlessly indifferent. So now he is awoken from this very deep sleep, which symbolizes this death. Okay? And it's a very important part of the story because he doesn't literally die in the story to become rebirth. But remember, we are talking about samsara, and he's feeling like he's hitting cycles of life. And we've seen our protagonist go through different doors, if you will, of different phases into different seasons of his life. And so now we know he's got to go into another season. There's still pages of the book left, right? So this is a spiritual sleep that he goes into. All he knew was that he had abandoned his bygone life. In the first instant of awareness, it seemed like a former long past incarnation, like an early pre-birth of his present ego. So again, this reference to samsara, that he had abandoned his bygone life, that full of disgust and distress, he had even wanted to throw it away, his actual life. But he had come to his senses by a river under a coconut tree with the sacred word Om. He goes back to basics. He goes back to the simple foundations of life that he understands, the river, the tree, and Om. Right? And sometimes we need that when we feel like we're losing our footing. Things seem very complicated. In fact, life is not very complicated. Life is very simple. There are simple tenets of life that we need fulfilled. And once you have those things fulfilled, you don't need anything more. It's kind of just like fluff. So for Siddhartha, these basic things of the water and the land and the Om, the soul, right, the Atman, is all he needs to remind himself that he is real, that his life is real, that his life is worth not killing, right? On top of page 80, and now he had awakened and was looking at the world as a new man. How many lives does Siddhartha live, right? Like we see him in awakening. He says, oh, my eyes are new again. I see these things new again. And here we are again. He has new eyes. You know, it's like Siddhartha has lived so many lives in these seasons. And perhaps it is because when he makes a decision, he does not hesitate and he does not doubt himself. He really goes into that life with full commitment. And in that commitment, he is able to experience and explore and absorb and live that life. And so that when he's done, he's really done. And he doesn't look back, and he looks forward only. And so now he's going to the next experience, which we will fully surrender to and fully commit to again. And so here we are again on page 80. And here we see Siddhartha being described by the narrator, our omniscient third person narrator, that this Siddhartha, this obstinate man, this bizarre man. I don't know about bizarre, but I sure know obstinate is a good word for him, right? Which means kind of similar to stubborn, but it usually just means when you make a decision, you stick to it. But usually you've thought about other things where stubborn kind of implies that you're not listening to anybody else. Siddhartha saw that Govinda did not recognize him. So he sees Govinda. And Govinda doesn't recognize Siddhartha because Siddhartha, years have gone by. Again, we don't really know how many years. We're about to find out how many years he's going to be away from Kamala, because the son of Siddhartha is going to emerge into the story. But it's been a long time that he was living in the world as a merchant with Kamaswami and Kamala, and now he sees Govinda, and Govinda is delighted to see him. And the Govinda at first doesn't realize it's Siddhartha. Because Govinda at the top of page 81 says, "You are sleeping. It's not good to sleep in such places. There are many serpents, and the forest animals have their trails." Now, this idea of serpents, very important. Just like birds have a type of symbolism, so do snakes, right? Snakes we usually see as the trickster character, as deceitful, as cunning, as poisonous, danger, death, all of that. And also kind of like the original idea of sin or vice that we have in our world. So Siddhartha says, "Thank you, Samana, for guarding my sleep. You disciples of the Sublime One are friendly. Go now." "I'm going, sir. May you always be well." "I thank you, Samana. Farewell, Govinda." And now the monk halted, and he says, "Wait a minute, how do you know my name?" And Siddhartha smiles, and he says, "I know you, O Govinda, from your father's hut, from the Brahmin school." And Govinda says, "You are Siddhartha." Now, you're thinking, how could they possibly not have recognized each other? Like, this is wild, right? They've lived very, very different lives. Not only has time passed and aged both of them, but they've just really lived different lives. You have to realize Siddhartha right now at this point, he still has his slicked back hair. He's still wearing his shoes, his fancy shoes. He's still wearing his fancy clothes from this town. He doesn't look like a guy who lives in the forest, and he definitely doesn't look like Siddhartha to Govinda. And Govinda has been on his own for a while without being in the shadow of Siddhartha. So Govinda's life has drastically changed, and these life changes tend to show up on us physically, especially on our face. And so they don't recognize each other at first, but then they recognize each other. He says, "Now I recognize you, and I do not understand why I did not recognize you right away. Welcome, Siddhartha. My joy at seeing you again is great." So they have this little powwow together for a minute, and Siddhartha tells Govinda rather that he's pilgriming. He's a pilgrim. He doesn't know where he's going though. And Govinda says, "Well, do you want to go to the Buddha?" And he's like, "No, I'm not a samana anymore. I'm a pilgrim." There's a difference, right? Bottom of page 82. "You are pilgriming, but few pilgrim in such clothes, few in such shoes, few with such hair. Never have I met a pilgrim, though I've been pilgriming for many years. I believe you, Govinda, but today you have indeed met such a pilgrim, in such shoes, in such garments. Remember, dear friend, ephemeral, highly ephemeral is the world of formations." And that reminds me immediately of Socrates and Plato, the world of forms, which is the ideals, right, that we've created or that come from somewhere that we are reminded of. But ephemeral, highly ephemeral, and then again he repeats it, ephemeral, highly ephemeral. Remember, ephemeral is the opposite of eternal. So ephemeral means things that pass away quickly, right? Where eternal means things that never pass away. Top of 83, "I was a rich man and am no longer one." Just like before when Siddhartha says, I don't know, he didn't know where he's going. We didn't say that, I'm saying it. He didn't know where he's going, but he knows where he's not going. He's not going back to the town. Sometimes you don't know where you're going to go. You just know where you're not going to go. And sometimes you don't know what you are, but you know what you're not. That's okay. That's enough to get started, right? And so here we see Siddhartha again completely with nothing. He took nothing from the town. He doesn't even have food or water. And he hasn't been living like a samana. He's been living like a rich man. So he's going to get hungry. He's going to want wine. He's going to want food. He's going to want good sleep, right? He's going to want things. So sometimes all you know is what you're not. So he says, "I was a rich man and I'm no longer one." and I do not know what I will be tomorrow. Well, that's honest. Let's go down to the middle of 83. With a smiling face, Siddhartha is peering after Govinda. He still loved him, that loyal man, that anxious man. And how could he in this moment, in this splendid hour after his wonderful sleep, right? He just had that deep sleep, that spiritual death, permeated with the Om, not love someone and something. That was the enchantment that had happened to him in his sleep. And through the Om, he now loved everything and everyone. He was full of cheerful love for anything he saw, and it seemed to him now that he had been so ill earlier because he had been able to love nothing and no one. And the earlier he's referring to is when he lived in the town. He referred to himself having a spiritual illness, right? So this is the illness that he's talking about having. So you could be sick not just in your body or in your mind, but also in your soul, right? Bottom of 83, he had been the master of 3 noble and invincible arts: fasting, waiting, and thinking. Remember, these were the tools that he went into the town with, and this is what he had lost by the time he had left. That had been his property, his might and his strength, his solid staff, and now he was going to have to return to those, right? Returning to basics. On 84, and now so it seemed he had truly become a child person, because he feels like he's one of the child people. He says, and now they had abandoned him, and he's referring to those fasting, waiting, and thinking, the way that he felt kind of different, or maybe a little bit more enlightened at this point than everybody else, and looking at everybody as silly and foolish. He's like, wow, I'm one of them. I can't even fast. I don't know how to wait. I don't even know how to think anymore. Go down to the very bottom of 84. Peculiar is my life indeed, he thought. It has taken peculiar detours. As a boy, I dealt only with gods and sacrifices. Top of 85. As a youth, I dealt only with asceticism, with thinking and meditating, seeking Brahma, honoring the eternal and Atman. But as a young man, I followed the penitence, lived in the forest, suffered heat and frost, learned how to hunger, taught my body castigation. Prompt and wonderful in the teaching of the great Buddha, enlightenment came to me. I felt knowledge about the oneness of the world circulating in me like my own blood. But then I had to get away from Buddha too, and from the great knowledge. I went and learned the pleasure of love from Kamala, learned business from Kamaswami, piled up money, wasted money, learned to love my stomach, learned to flatter my senses. I had to spend many years losing my spirit, unlearning how to think, forgetting the oneness. And in this one paragraph, we have the entire summary of the book so far, right? Literally, the entire summary of the book. So that starts at the bottom of 84 and goes to 85. In the next paragraph, he talks again about this bird, and he's still thinking out loud to himself, or he's thinking, and he says, and yet this way was very good, and yet the bird in my breast did not die. So he felt like it was gone, that hope, but it's not. And that reminds me of Elizabeth Bishop's poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. But what a way it was. I had to go through so much stupidity, so much vice, so much error, so much disgust and disillusion and distress, merely in order to become a child again and become afresh. I had to sink down to the thought of suicide in order to experience grace, to hear Om again, to sleep properly again, and awaken properly again, without drinking and lust and without exhaustion, right? He said, where will my way lead me now? This way is foolish, it runs in loops, right? So now we're jumping ahead to 86, and he's really kind of just thinking about the way that he lived, right? He's really going back and thinking about all of the things that he partook in and how he really let himself go, and those things that he believed in so strongly and lived out for so many years, he really just completely forgot about them. And and I love the way Hesse writes this at the bottom of 86. He says, he could have remained with Kamaswami for years, acquiring money, squandering money, fattening his belly, letting his soul go thirsty. I like the way that every time Siddhartha is thinking about money, he thinks about how he got it and how he wasted it, how he got it and how he spent it, how he got it and then he threw it away, right? Because that's so money, time, right? He could have gone on living for years in that gentle, well-cushioned hell. And when I've never heard of this phrase until reading this, of hell being gentle and well-cushioned, because we usually think of hell being torture, right? Hell is hot, it's fire, there's people screaming, it's torture, it never ends. And yet, this one is gentle and well-cushioned, which means what? It means it keeps you there, right? Because it's comfortable. Because it's scarier almost to leave than to stay. And thank God Siddhartha did leave. And when he mentions this cushions, what do we think of immediately? What was his whole reason for staying in that town for so long? It was Kamala. And how do we see Kamala come in? She comes in on her red cushions, right? the first time we see her. Top of page 87. It is good, he thought, to taste everything that one needs to know. As a child, I learned that wealth and worldly pleasure are not good. I knew it for a long time, but I experienced it only now, and now I know it not only with my memory, but also with my eyes, with my heart, with my stomach. Good for me that I know it. So, he was taught that this life was going to lead to nowhere from the very beginning of his life. This was part of his teaching, right? But is that what he meant by being taught by experience rather than told? Right? We have that saying that the child will not learn that the stove is hot until he or she touches it for himself, right? Because the parent will say, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove because it's hot. And the kid is like, no. That happened to me when I was young. I wanted to iron so badly. The second my mother left the room to take a phone call, I think I was like 3 years old, I went to the ironing board and she told me, stay away, it's hot, it's not for you, you're too little, da da da. Well, the second she went to go pick up a phone call, I went to that ironing board and I picked up that iron, and that iron was too big for me and I was way too short for the ironing board, and my other arm was here and that iron fell on my hand, and the only way my mom got off the phone was to hear me screaming and to come and take that iron off my sizzling flesh. I still don't iron to this day. So yes, experience is a wonderful teacher. Was this not what he had wanted to kill in his years of ardent penitence? Was it not his ego, his small, proud, anxious ego? Remember that pride blazed up in him before? He felt pride blaze up in him a couple chapters ago, and I talked about that. And now we have this again, this reference to pride. And the next sentence, in the next paragraph, you'll see it again. He had been full of pride. Now, don't forget what man's greatest vice is, right? It's hubris, which is pride. 88. But now he saw that the secret voice had been right, that no teacher could ever have redeemed him until the priest and Samana inside him were dead. Until Siddhartha the sensualist, Siddhartha the grasper, could die. And Siddhartha felt a deep love for the streaming water, and he resolved not to leave it again so soon. So this river is curing him. This river is like a salve. It's like a healing medicine to him, just to be next to this current and this water. And he is experiencing so much understanding from this river just by being next to it. And he realizes, you know what, it wasn't all for nothing, that life that I lived. It wasn't pointless. Yes, it was what everyone said it was going to be, which is filthy, gluttonous, lustful, prideful, greedy, dirty. But it wasn't for nothing, because now I know. Right? It's different to read it, and it's different to know it. Sometimes we learn a lot of things by reading, and a lot of times we learn things just by living. Right? Wisdom doesn't just come through books. So that's where we are with Siddhartha now. So we are wondering what's going to happen. So now the ferryman is the next chapter. I want to remain by this river, thought Siddhartha. It is the same when I crossed while going to the child people, right? So he wants to stay at this river. So he's at the bank of the river. And I told you about rivers and being by the bank of the river. What poem was it? I think it is T.S. Eliot's. I can't remember right now. The straw people, the dead people, leaning together. He says being at the bank of the Tumid River, and what he is referring to, and I hate it when I can't remember title of the poem. What he's referring to is that mythological being on the bank of the river. That river being the river Styx, going to the underworld and giving Charon the pennies and the coins to the ferryman to allow you to cross. So he says at the end of this first paragraph, my new life start out from there. It is possible that we can live many lives like Siddhartha, but the one thing that we don't see Siddhartha exhibiting like most of us do is fear, right? Because usually we are afraid to change. We change when we have to, like when this virus is happening. So now we are all forced to change and we have to quickly adapt. I mean, you have to remember humans are very good at adapting, but our willingness to change, as you can see, people are still obstinate and don't want to abide by social distancing or wearing masks outside, or, complaining about non-essential business being open, because change is really hard for us. And that's what keeps people in the same place for years. And Siddhartha has been stuck, unwilling to change But I don't think it was a fear of changing, because in this character we don't see that until he gets to be scared of himself when he's having these suicidal thoughts, but we don't see him scared of other things. And so that's something to think about, like what we're afraid of when we're about to change. What are you afraid of happening? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen, and what's the worst thing that could happen if you don't change, right? So the next paragraph, he says, this newly awakened voice, and it said to him, love this water, stay with it, learn from it. So, I mean, there's a lot of just this time by the river. He meets this amazing ferryman. The ferryman introduces himself as Vasudeva. They become very good friends. And Vasudeva is living there alone. He's the ferryman. He lives in a hut. He's the one who goes across the river to bring people back to this side, and he brings people from this side back to the other side, and that's his job in this life. And so he invites Siddhartha to stay with him. On page 92 now, the paragraph that begins, I thank you, said Siddhartha, I thank you and accept, and I also thank you, Vasudeva, for listening to me so well. Rare are the people who know how to listen, and I've never met anyone who knew it so well as you. This too I will learn from you. And they have a great friendship, these two. On page 93, they are now experiencing the river together. Vasudeva is as a ferryman and living by the river, he has the same opinion of the river that Siddhartha has come to at this point, that it teaches everything. They talk about it having many voices. They heard its voice, they listened to it, the river became sacred for them as it is for me. Let us now retire for the night, Siddhartha. And so the river is sacred. The river is like a temple, imagine. 94, did the river, he once asked, also teach you this secret, that time does not exist? And this is what we were talking about before, right? And Vasudeva's face lit up with a bright smile. Vasudeva's whole demeanor, the way he is illustrated as being so kind of peaceful and happy and smiling and kind and understanding and patient and good listener, sounds very much like Buddha, right? Yes, Siddhartha, he said, is that what you mean? That the river is everywhere at once? At its source and at its mouth, at the waterfall, at the ferry, at the rabbits, in the sea, in the mountains, everywhere at once, and only the present exists for it, and not the shadow of the future. That is it, said Siddhartha. And when I learned that, I looked at my life, and it was also a river, and the boy Siddhartha was separated from the adult Siddhartha and from the old man Siddhartha only by shadow, not by substance. Wow. Nor were Siddhartha's earlier births a past, and his death and his return to Brahma are no future. Nothing was, nothing will be, everything is, everything has being and is present. It's like reminding me of that saying we say, there's no time like the present, right? Like, don't put off today what you could do tomorrow. That's the opposite, because we also have heard that tomorrow's not promised to anybody. So if tomorrow's not promised, tomorrow's not really a thing, is it? Because tomorrow's not here. So all we have is today. And all we have in today is the day, because we don't, where I am, it's not even night yet. So I don't even know if I have the night yet, right? So they're talking about the illusion of time passing. And then really, why are we waiting for things when there is no time like the present? Literally, there is no time except presentness. Fascinating, right? You can make your head go crazy for hours just thinking about that stuff. I love that stuff. That's philosophy. 94. Oh, we're not all suffering's time. We're not all fear and self-torment time, right? Is it not true, oh friend, that the river has many voices, very many voices at the top of page 95. And in the middle, on many evenings, they sat together at the tree trunk by the bank, silently listening to the water, which was no water for them, but the voice of life, the voice of being, the voice of eternal becoming. Now what they're saying, referencing there, is being is the present, right? Here you are in this moment, but also everything that is of this moment is also becoming eternity as it is lived out, right? It's fascinating. That's the kind of stuff I eat up. Now on 96, we go back to this reference of time. 96, the first full paragraph starts, the years flowed away and no one counted them. Now, it's not a coincidence that the years are flowing away because they're by the river, but it's also coming back to this theme that time is an illusion. It's like a perception of pain or no pain, right? Jump to 97, Kamala also pilgrimed to him, and now we see Kamala. Wow. She's back in the story. On one of these days when so many were pilgriming to the dying Buddha, Kamala also pilgrimed to him. She, once the most beautiful of courtesans. She had long since withdrawn from her earlier life, had given her garden to Gautama's monks, had taken refuge in the teaching, was one of the female friends and benefactresses of the pilgrims. Upon hearing the news of Gautama's coming death, she, together with the boy Siddhartha, her son, so his son's name is Siddhartha as well, had set out on foot in simple clothes. She was traveling along the river with her little son, but boys grew tired, so the boy is really whiny and anxious. Top of page 98. Pilgrims are not far from Vasudeva's ferry when little Siddhartha once again made his mother rest. She too was tired. The boy looked at her shocked. I'm sorry, I'm skipping. She too, Kamala, was tired, and while the boy chewed on a banana, she squatted on the ground, closing her eyes a bit, and rested. But suddenly she uttered a lamenting shriek. The boy looked at her shocked and saw that her face was pale with horror, and from under her dress slipped a black snake that had bitten Kamala. And so now we have the snake. We had the serpents before, right? When Govinda was watching over Siddhartha to make sure that he was not be bitten by a snake. Now we have Kamala actually being bitten by the snake. And this is how Siddhartha, little Siddhartha, comes into the guardianship of our male protagonist, Siddhartha. Jump to page 100. She's dying. Kamala's dying now. They bring her to the hut. They try to save her. They can't save her. They know she's dying. And Siddhartha is looking at her. He sat and sat, gazing at her lifeless face. He gazed and gazed at her lips, her old, tired, pinched lips. He remembered that once in the springtime of his life, he had likened those lips to a freshly broken fig. He sat and sat, studying the pale face, the weary creases. He filled up with sight, saw his own face lying like that, just as white, just as faded. Also saw his face and hers young, with red lips, with burning eyes. And the feeling of the present simultaneously penetrated him fully, the feeling of eternity in this hour. Time reference. He felt deeply, more deeply than ever, the indestructibility of every life, the eternity of every instance. So you see how Hesse is really enfolding these things into each other like a flower. Like there's the idea of time, the idea of presentness, of being, of life, of human life. There's also the idea of eternity, of the universe. There's the idea of the soul, and souls have to be eternal. That's what makes them special. They are supernatural. It's not of the earth, and it's not of the mind. It is something different. And so that's enfolded in the layers, and everything is always working together, right? And in Siddhartha's mind, this clicks for him. This makes sense for him. He gets it. And that's what makes Siddhartha so special, right? That he sees things and it's not passive knowledge to him. It's activated. He's always using the knowledge he has, what he sees, what he hears, what he knows, what he reads, and he activates it and synthesizes it to every other thing he's ever known. So he's constantly putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And to him, it's not two-dimensional. It's not even three-dimensional, right? It's like multi-dimensional. It is so many sides and yet is all one thing, right? Just amazing, amazing. Top of page 101, but Siddhartha went out, sat in front of the hut all night, listening to the river, awash with the past, touched and enfolded by all the times of his life at once. Just like I said it. The son was very distraught, obviously. This is the only family he's ever known. They make a pyre for Kamala where Vasudeva's wife was buried. So they bury Kamala there too. And now we are on page 103 in the next chapter called The Sun. And I think when you read this, right, we all get a little annoyed with the son. He's kind of annoying. He's spoiled. He's a brat. And he's terrible to Siddhartha. He treats Siddhartha terribly. And Vasudeva has to watch silently because that's the most appropriate thing to do because it's not his son, it's not his place. But he cares very much for his friend and the state of his friend's mind and soul in caring for the son. You know, Siddhartha's never cared for anybody but himself. He has never been a father. He's long since not spoken to his own father. Let's look on page 103. Siddhartha indulged him and let him be. He honored the boy's grief. Okay, so at first he's saying, you know, the son, the kid just lost his mother. He's going to act out. He's going to act out. Siddhartha understood that the grieving, pampered boy could not suddenly and willingly be content in a strange place and in poverty, because before he was with Kamala, he probably had servants. He probably lived a good life. Now all of a sudden he's living in a hut with two old guys, right? But time flowed on. Again, this reference of time flowing with the river, page 103. The very bottom, Siddhartha began to realize that his son had brought not peace and happiness to him, but sorrow and suffering. Still, he loved him, and he cherished the sorrow and suffering of love more than joy and happiness without the boy. So very much the feeling of a parent, right? He became instantly a parent. He's like, look, this is definitely not peaches and cream. Sometimes this really sucks, but I really love this kid. I can't not love this kid, and I love him more like this than not having the kid at all, right? 104, for a long months, Siddhartha waited for his son to understand, to accept his love, perhaps to even love him back. For long months, Vasudeva waited, watched and waited, and held his tongue. Page 105, his sufferings will not be small. His heart is too hard and proud. Such hearts must suffer much. And I love this idea, my gosh, because this explains so much to me, at least, about like how people take different paths in life. You know, I'm always looking to find something in what I'm reading that is new and fresh and something I've not heard before. And all the things that I've come across. And here when Hesse is talking about that Vasudeva is saying, look, Siddhartha, your son is also called. He too is of eternal life. This is top of 105. But do we know then, you and I, to what he is called to, what path, what deeds, to what sufferings? You know, his suffering will not be small, and because his heart is too hard and proud. Reminds me of someone, Siddhartha, right? Such hearts must suffer much. Wander much, do much injustice, saddle themselves with many sins. Tell me, dear friend, are you not raising your son? Do you not force him? Do you not beat him? Do you not punish him? No, Vasudeva, I've done none of that, he says. I knew it. You never force him. You never beat him. You never order him, because you know that soft is stronger than hard. Water is stronger than rock. Love is stronger than violence. Very good, I praise you, but it is not a mistake on your part to believe that you never force him, never punish him. Do you not bind him in bonds with your love? Do you not shame him daily and make things even harder for him with your kindness and patience? Do you not force him, the arrogant and pampered boy, to live in a hut with two old banana eaters, for whom even rice is a delicacy, whose thoughts cannot be his, whose hearts are old and silent and take a different course from his? Isn't he not forced by all of this? Isn't he punished? So Vasudeva is such a voice of wisdom here, and he's saying, look, you're doing everything right, but in all honesty, I don't know if this kid should stay here for his own goodness. We don't know the kid's path. The boy is young. He's an 11-year-old kid by the time the chapter ends. Do you really believe you committed your follies to spare your son? Now, what he's referring to, and this is on page 106, is the idea that the sins of the father pass to the child, right? Pass to the son. That what our parents do, essentially, is, or what they suffer, is supposed to spare us anything. And it doesn't, right? Your parents could suffer and try to do everything to prevent you from a life of suffering, but then you, by your own choices or by circumstances that you're placed in, end up suffering still. So we can't prevent that generation to generation. Bottom of what that paragraph on 106, do you really believe, dear friend, that anyone at all is spared this path? Perhaps your little son, because you love him, because you would like to spare him pain and sorrow and disillusion, but even if you died for him 10 times over, you could not take away even the tiniest bit of his destiny. Because destiny is destiny, right? It is destined to be. It is preordained. The path or the end game, the goal, the place that you're going to end up sitting or standing at the end was all determined, just maybe not by you. Page 107. Siddhartha kind of really feels like he's still a child person now again because the son is here. He says, but now that his son was here, now he, Siddhartha, too, had become a child person, suffering for someone else, loving someone else, lost in love, a fool for love. Now he, too, at this late time, felt the strongest and strangest passion, suffered from it, suffered woefully, and yet he was blissful, was somewhat renewed, and I love the way he says this, was somewhat richer, right? Because the things that Siddhartha really felt rich in was not when he was with Kamaswami, making money, and not even when he was with Kamal or able to be with her or afford her. But he said that his property was the ability to think, wait, and fast. And now being a father has made him richer too. On page 108 at the very bottom, the boy runs away. He has a blowout with his father that night. He yells at him. He says very unkind things, says he hates him, says he would rather be a murderer than be like him. And he goes away. He comes back at night. They don't speak. But the next morning, at the very bottom, the next morning he had disappeared, and also gone was a small woven basket of two-color baste, where the ferryman kept the copper and silver coins they received as fares. And also gone was the boat. Siddhartha saw it lying on the opposite bank. The boy had run away. So he tells Vasudeva, we're going to build a raft and we're going to get back our boat. And Vasudeva says, yeah, we're also going to need an oar, because he knows the boy. He's like, the boy broke the oar. Page 110. Siddhartha stays at the bank because he wants to go pursue his son. Now, Vasudeva says, you shouldn't do it. There's no point. What are you going to do, force him back? But Siddhartha can't just let the son go. He's very worried about him, obviously. It says, he's worried about him going through the forest alone. Thinking further, he also found that he was no longer worried about his son. After a time, deep down, he knew that his son neither had perished nor was menaced by any danger in the forest. And as he's going to the town, he sees everything again like he did the first time. Remember, this was the ferryman that brought him back. So now he's back and he sees in Kamala's garden, it really was transformed into a garden for samanas. He saw monks in yellow cowls wandering under the beautiful trees in Kamala's garden. Page 111. He felt a deep love in his heart for the runaway. It was like a wound. And I really like the way Hesse describes this love that's like a wound, right? Because it's like it hurts. It's like a sore spot. It's like a tender spot. He also felt that the wound was not for wallowing, that it must become a blossom and shine. And then we have another time reference. For several hours, he squatted there, listening, saw no more images, sank into emptiness. So he's just looking at the town, and he's just completely just like going like in a trance. Whenever he felt the burning wound, he soundlessly uttered the Om, filled himself with Om. Some monks see him, they put some fruit in front of him, and then Vasudeva finally puts his hand on his shoulder and kind of wakes Siddhartha up, and then they go and they split the food and go back. And so in my next lecture, I will cover the last chapters of that. But what a transformation, how much time has happened, how many things have happened since we've seen Siddhartha living in this life of luxury, and now to be tortured by this boy, right? It's so interesting. And it got really dark here. It looks like a storm is coming. So we'll post one more lecture after this.